Notice this video will include frank discussions of sex. If in your country or culture you are considered too young for this material, do not watch this video. Welcome back into the Bangtan universe wormhole. After covering all the shorter videos of the Wings era, I finally reached the Mona Lisas of this era, the Korean and Japanese versions of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. This video covers the second half of the Korean version, which actually provides some spoilers for the Love Yourself era. And after you watch the Korean Blood, Sweat, and Tears analysis, be on the lookout for the Japanese analysis, which will come out next week. If you aren't familiar with the Bangtan universe yet, you need to watch this video before you watch the current video. Otherwise, you won't have a clue what's going on. You also need to know a little bit about the novel Daemeon, since it's so important to the Wings era. So if you haven't been following my discussions of the short films, pause this video for a moment and read this brief summary before continuing. And now let's get on to the good stuff. In the first half of my Blood, Sweat, and Tears analysis, I told you it was Seokjin's responsibility to guide his friends through the passage from youth to early adulthood. This is a time of intense struggle and temptation when we all make mistakes, sometimes horrible mistakes, and we all lose our innocence. But at the same time, we begin to figure out who we really are and what we really believe. BTS have chosen Wings as the symbol for successful transition out of this period. And in this MV, we see all 7 characters make that transition. The first video of this 2-part analysis ended with Seokjin formally initiating his friends into the struggles of this period, and in this video we'll see how their struggles play out. But Seokjin's role is complete, at least as far as he's concerned. From here on out, each of the 3 Hyungs will mentor one of the Magnes, while Seokjin watches nervously. Maybe he should be more involved, but he's afraid to say or do too much because he hasn't lost his innocence, and he doesn't want to. He doesn't even want his friends to lose their innocence. In the last video, I held back a few bits of information because I knew they'd work better at a later point in the narrative. Specifically, they'd work best at this point, when we're between topics and can take a moment to gather our thoughts. So here are the things I didn't tell you. First, Blood, Sweat, and Tears doesn't just give us a new view of the HYYH era. That's what the short films did, but BST, which is what I'm calling Blood, Sweat, and Tears from now on, will also give us some spoilers for the Love Yourself era. Second, we caught a flash of several colors mixing together while Namjoon was preparing his absinthe, and we'll see something similar in this half of the analysis. I'll use a quote from the Wings concept book to explain what the mixing of colors means. There are 2 contrasting conceptions called monotonous and colored. Here, colored doesn't only mean having colors, but also being glamorous and diverse. From the monotonous world of youth, BTS learned about the various situations of the colorful real world. As a matter of fact, all the videos from the HYYH era have a grayish tone, which you might or might not have noticed, and all the videos from the Wings era are filled with bright colors. And while we're still on the subject of colors, let me point out these puddles of hot pink in the initiation scene we saw last time. I consulted a lot of different websites to find out what this color symbolizes, and the consensus is that hot pink is commonly associated with passion, sex, and lust, but also, to a lesser extent, with energy, new horizons, and self-standards. So it's no coincidence that this color first appeared in this neon sign, which says the Tempter, and that it didn't really shine again until the initiation scene. And now that the boys have been initiated, you're going to see hot pink everywhere. So that's it. That's all I held back from you. Now we're ready to get on with our increasingly enthusiastic story. Hoseok is the most eager member to become a mentor. The moment the initiation scene ends, he pushes himself away from the others in the choreo and sings, "It's okay even if it hurts. Tie me up so that I can't run away. Grab me tight and shake me up so I can't come to my senses." This is the same character who began the Wings era by singing Boy Meets Evil, in which he was afraid of the things that were too sweet to resist. Now he's so entranced by them that he's afraid of breaking free from them. And so he goes straight back to his room and shoots Taehyung with an arrow. which turns into paint. If you're confused, just remember that everything in this video is symbolic. As the Wings concept book told us, the boys are moving into a more colorful, glamorous world than the one they grew up in. So what Hoseok is really doing is sharing his knowledge of that world with Taehyung. And that knowledge includes all the energy, passion, and lust represented by hot pink. I won't discuss all the other colors in the paint because that would be tiresome. So instead I'll point out that the paint itself is the perfect expression of Hoseok's mentorship of Taehyung. In Hoseok's short film, we saw all his secret thoughts and emotions splashed on the walls of a padded cell. And in Taehyung's whole storyline, he splashed graffiti all over walls to express his thoughts and emotions. But did you notice something strange about how Hoseok shot Taehyung? Well, I mean more strange than the arrow turning into paint. The thing is, the paint didn't hit Taehyung. He didn't even seem to notice it. That's because he's still inside the veil that represents the pain he's suffering due to Namjoon's betrayal. Eventually he'll cast it off, but that won't really happen until the Love Yourself era when he gets to mentor someone else. For now, he's too hurt to trust anyone, even Hoseok. That's why we saw this graffiti all the way back in the Japanese version of the Run MV. And in the Japanese version of BST, which we'll see next week, Hoseok's arrow will be replaced by a green dart, and Taehyung will be absolutely terrified. And on that note, let me give you another Easter egg. I've said before that some of the BTS photo shoots are stuffed with Easter eggs, and I even made a whole video about one of them, the 2022 season's greetings. Another photo shoot that's stuffed with Easter eggs is this particular shoot from Butter, but I'm only going to show you one Easter egg this time. Look, Hoseok has a green dart again. Now let's see how Namjoon and Jungkook are doing. I've already told you that despite Namjoon's intelligence and his genuine love for learning, he refuses to grow up and he's a terrible mentor. That's why Taehyung is still deeply hurt by Namjoon's betrayal of him. With that in mind, you shouldn't be too surprised by this scene. Namjoon's room, which was so full of colors and decorations, is disappearing in a cloud of green smoke. Green represents youth, and there's nothing wrong with youth. But the boys' world should be filling with more colors now, and Namjoon's room is losing colors. He doesn't want to move on from youth, and that means he can't help Jungkook move on. But notice Jungkook's lollipop. It's blue, not green, and in the first half of my BST analysis, we saw him holding that lollipop while he was learning to fly, almost entirely by himself. Namjoon's sole contribution to Jungkook's growth, at least in BST, was to give him a taste of absinthe that was mixed in with some candle wax that you saw Jungkook touch to his tongue. But giving alcohol to a minor isn't what you call good mentoring, and it gets a lot worse in the Japanese BST. We get a really deep-cut Easter egg in a boom shot that rises from Namjoon's room up to Yoongi's. Right here, in between the two levels, you can see the word chat room followed by the numbers 2 and 3 and an upward pointing arrow. Chat Room is a movie about a group of teens who gather in online chat rooms which are depicted as if they were real rooms in a hotel. Most of the talk takes place in this particular chat room, which as you can see looks a lot like Yoongi's room. That explains the arrow pointing upwards to his room. It's telling us that the BST set designers got their inspiration for his room from the movie Chat Room. Meanwhile, the number 2 refers to the fact that these two guys spend the most time together alone in the movie's chat room, with one of them pretending to mentor the other. I'm not 100% sure about the number 3, but this is my best guess. I think it refers to Jungkook. That would make sense because Yoongi's mistakes with Jungkook make him overly cautious with Jimin, and right now Jungkook is in the room just below Yoongi with Namjoon, where the smoke is so thick that some of it is leaking up into Yoongi's room. Despite that boom shot, we don't really get to look at Yoongi and Jimin yet. The camera passes between them just long enough for us to see that Jimin is holding an apple and Yoongi is holding a strip of cloth. Then we move on out through the rear doors onto the balcony where we find Taehyung sitting on the rail. The painting in front of him is Landscape with the Fall of Icarus, which we also saw in the parlor together with the larger painting, Lament for Icarus. Now Jungkook is learning to fly in the parlor, which holds one version of Icarus's death, and Taehyung is sitting in front of another painting of Icarus's death, and he's about to jump. What's more, this painting is even more tragic than the other one because no one even notices his fall in this one. We can barely see him ourselves. Here he is. But Taehyung doesn't care. He's actually happy to try flying. According to the Wings concept book, Taehyung's jump signals the death of youth and entry into the next phase. So even though Hoseok's attempt at mentoring him really didn't get through, Taehyung was able to launch himself into the next era. Taehyung's leap touches off a frenzy of excitement among the others, who are now dancing in rooms that have turned entirely hot pink, and they're singing "Want More, More, More" over and over. But the group choreo doesn't represent what their individual characters feel. And right now there are so many quick, disconnected flashes of scenes that all I can do is hit the highlights. First, Jungkook is let go of the swing and is floating high above the floor, spinning slowly as white feathers fall from his body down to the floor. He doesn't seem to be in any danger, and based on what happens to Taehyung in the Wings Tour concert trailer, Jungkook's lost feathers will grow back in, they'll just be black. Now let's talk about Seokjin, who's still at the initiation site, actually standing on the table now and holding a child's balloon. The balloon tells us that he wants to keep his childhood innocence, but the way the scene is drowning in hot pink tells us he's fighting a losing battle. But Seokjin isn't the only one resisting temptation. Yoongi's resisting it too, but on behalf of Jimin. Like I've already said, Yoongi knows how vulnerable Jimin can be, and he also feels guilty for mistreating Jungkook, so he's determined to protect Jimin from harm. Unfortunately, blindfolding Jimin in this time of trials is itself a kind of harm. And now we switch back to Seokjin to see his friends uncovering his eyes. We saw them covering his eyes in the first half of my analysis, and they did it probably because they didn't want him to see what they were up to. But now everyone except Jimin has reached a higher level of maturity, and they'd know they shouldn't have done that. But at least some of them are wise enough now to realize that Seokjin is afraid to do what they did, to complete the passage through this era. So they uncover his eyes in hopes that he can accept the truth now. But Seokjin is really still on the initiation table, and the color has changed from hot pink to red. In Korea, red symbolizes passion, energy, luck, and celebration. So this is a great time for Seokjin to release that balloon. Unfortunately, it's not a great time to get this quote from Namjoon when young Sinclair decides that his new friend is actually just as evil as the devil himself. He too was a tempter. He too was a link to the second, the evil world with which I no longer wanted anything to do. And notice how just as the balloon slips out of frame, Seokjin reaches up as if to catch it. He's still having second thoughts. It's so frustrating. It's like watching a K-drama where two people are destined to be together, but they spend 12 or 24 episodes finding reasons not to say they love each other. And now we've reached a scene I've been looking forward to since I wrote the script for the first half of this BST analysis. It's time to teach you about an important character from Namjoon whom you haven't even heard about yet, unless you've read the novel yourself, because he isn't mentioned in any of the quotes in the short films. His name is Pistorius, and he was Sinclair's final mentor before Sinclair abandoned him to complete his individuation on his own. This is how they met. One night, Sinclair left his apartment and wandered through the streets until his attention was caught by the sound of a church organ. He was fascinated by the music, which he hadn't heard before, and eventually he met the organist, Pistorius. When we see Suga playing the organ in BST, he's taking the role of Pistorius. And even though Sinclair leaves him in the end, he does teach Sinclair a lot. For one thing, he explains that Abraxas is just a representation of the world, with all its good and bad, and all its complexity in general. But the part that concerns us is what Pistorius has to say about flying. Sinclair tells him about a dream he's had, in which he was flung into the air without warning and had to figure out how to control his flight, which he did. Pistorius uses that dream as a metaphor for abandoning the kind of life most people lead, where they think ordinary thoughts and do ordinary things with their lives. And this is the answer to my first question. No, you don't have to fly. You can stay on the ground and live like most people, fitting in and never asking the biggest questions about life. But people with clear minds and rational questions, like Namjoon and Sinclair, have the capacity to control their flight. And that's the answer to our second question. You can fly without falling like Icarus. Controlling your flight is still very dangerous, and as a matter of fact, Pistorius is afraid to really fly because if he announces his true beliefs to his friends and everyone else, he'll lose his job with the church. And that's why Sinclair eventually leaves him. He doesn't look down on Pistorius, and they do remain friends, but he realizes that he's learned everything he can from Pistorius, and there's still so much more he has left to learn. That means he'll have to do it on his own. And if you think about it, Jungkook and Taehyung are doing the same thing in BST. And pretty soon you'll find out whether or not Jimin follows them or whether Yoongi relents. From this point onward, it becomes impossible to put these events in chronological order. These episodes might come from different time loops, since Seokjin does still have that ability to time travel, but I think it's more likely to be an editing choice. The 7 friends are growing even more frenzied, almost like revelers at the Festival of Dionysus, and it's just hard to keep track of who's doing what and when. So I'm going to address the problem by simply explaining what happens as it happens. Suga as Pistorius is playing the organ, while Suga as the character Yoongi is racing toward the exit along with everyone else. And that version of Yoongi is dragging Jimin along with him. This might seem odd since he tried so hard to protect Jimin during the era, but that might be why he's hurrying to get Jimin through the exit now. Yoongi could be telling himself that he succeeded in keeping Jimin safe through this era, and now he just has to get him out the door before anything bad happens. Meanwhile, Seokjin has the opposite problem. He's turned around again and seems to be listening to the organ music, which, by the way, is the actual piece referenced in the novel. It's called Passacaglia in D minor by Buxtehude, and its theme is the duality between strictness and freedom. Seokjin probably hasn't thought of the Wings era in terms of strictness and freedom because he's been entirely focused on good and evil. But these new words resonate with him thanks to his upbringing and his friends. So he's starting to become more open now to the idea of passing through this era and losing his innocence and opening his mind. Taehyung notices Seokjin standing there and turns to help him. Taehyung might not think of what he's doing as mentoring, but he does know what to do. He covers Seokjin's eyes just for a moment, then uncovers them to show him the angel. You all know what happens next, so I'm going to pause here for just a moment to tell you about something really interesting that could have happened. Originally, Yoongi was supposed to be Seokjin's mentor rather than Taehyung, but for some reason Yoongi just looked silly when he did that pose, and that's how Taehyung ended up being assigned the role. But think about how the meaning of the scene changes depending on who opens Seokjin's eyes and shows him the angel. If it had been Yoongi, he'd have been acting in the role of Pistorius, taking Sinclair/Seokjin as far as he could, then letting him go on alone. But Taehyung is the butterfly's chosen one, just as Seokjin is the cat's chosen one. Taehyung is also the yang to Seokjin's yin, so it actually makes more sense for Taehyung to take this role than it did for Yoongi. He has more reason to do it. Now let's look at the angel, which represents all that's best in a world of duality. Its body is a mix of white and black. It's equally male and female, judging by the shape of its limbs, upper chest, and face. Incidentally, I mentioned during one of the short films that Damien and his mother Ava are a bit androgynous, and that's a sign of their completeness. And while we're on that topic, the final scene of the novel describes Damien giving Sinclair a kiss from Ava, and he kisses Sinclair on the lips. So when Seokjin kisses this statue, he's not just accepting the duality of the world and of himself, he's also reenacting that moment from the novel Damien. And now that he's kissed the angel, his 6 friends celebrate in earnest. Taehyung reveals his torn back but smiles, not out of devilishness, but out of wisdom and happiness. Hoseok, in the most sexual scene of the whole MV, can't contain his excitement. The angel's body cracks and bleeds colors because awakening to the complexity of the world means awakening to all its different colors. Jimin removes his own blindfold, meaning all 3 of the magnates have now done the same thing as Sinclair, and maybe that's the way it has to be done. And Jungkook is so satisfied with his flight that he's sitting on the bed and panting. Make of that what you will. Next, we get a brief glimpse of Seokjin approaching the mirror, just long enough to see a quote from Nietzsche, which translates as, "You must have chaos within yourself to give birth to a dancing star." Then it's back to the celebration because now all 7 boys do have chaos within themselves. The members lick their lips and give smoldering looks. Their dancing becomes even more erotic. Jungkook continues to bask in the afterglow. But Hoseok celebrates in a different way, and that's another spoiler for the Love Yourself era. His Madonna's face breaks apart. Now, throughout the HYYH and Wings eras, his mother fixation has been so strong that he sees his mother in other women, both friends and strangers. And he's going to continue to do this until near the end of the Love Yourself era, when he travels to another city and tries to become a new person. Something about that experience really does make him a new person, and he couldn't have reached that breakthrough without first losing his innocence. Finally, we return to Seokjin to see what he sees in the mirror now that he's changed. Remember, the mirror doesn't lie, so the first thing we might notice is the darkness behind him. We saw something like that in Awake, and it has the same meaning now that it did then. He can't go back to where he came from, he can only go forward. Now notice that the flower has changed. It still looks like a lily from his point of view, and we know white lilies symbolize innocence and purity. But in the mirror, that lily becomes a whole bouquet of hot pink celotias. And in the language of flowers, celotias stand for boldness and courage, immortality, friendship, and love. Seokjin lost his perfection, which is why his face cracks, but in return he gained a whole bouquet of wonderful traits. Unfortunately, his final expression tells us he's not happy with the trade, and that's another spoiler for the Love Yourself era. He's still trying to be a good person, he's just found a different person to judge his goodness. It's the girl whose diary he stole. He wants to be the right person for her, even if he has to erase everything that makes him unique. And unlike Hoseok, Seokjin won't lose this fixation in the Love Yourself era. He won't lose it until the darkest time loop of all. It's not quite time to say goodbye to the Wings series yet, because the Japanese version of Blood, Sweat, and Tears is just as fascinating as the Korean version, but it's also shorter and easier to understand. Plus, it tells stories about the BU that you can't find in the notes or anywhere else. So stay tuned for next week's conclusion to Wings. I promise you won't be disappointed. Abo Bangpo.